notification that it's being live streamed. So now we're even more broad.
Go live.
All right, we're gonna start at free past. So I'm as you can see, I'm impatient. Daniel was saying 5 past, but we're gonna start at free past.
I feel you on that one.
Yes. Hello to everyone joining, to all the newcomers to this live stream. We're going to be talking about front-end authorization and just front-end experiences and how we can manage experiences with authorization, how we can restrict people to see things in our UIs and so on and so forth. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. We've got some amazing guests with us who are going to give us a lot of insight, hopefully, into the world of, well, not just authorization, but also front-end development. So for all of you guys waiting, you should be excited.
Sorry, I'm just looking up auth jokes online.
Did you find an auth joke?
A few.
All right.
Go for it.
What do you call an unexcavated pyramid?
Unexcavated pyramid. I have no idea.
It's unencrypted.
Such a dad joke. All right, so it's free past. So my patience has run out. We're going to start this live stream. I'm going to start off quickly by introducing the live stream. I'll introduce myself and I'll hand it off to you guys. So welcome everyone for all those new joining. Today we're going to be talking about front-end authorization. As you know, authorization is extremely critical in all applications because it allows us to specifically state which user is allowed to do certain things. And therefore, based on the permissions that that user might have, we can do a lot of things like render their UI experiences, make sure that, well, for some reason, they might be doing exactly what they're intended to do, rather than the things that they're not allowed, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're going to get into today. Now, my name is Filip Grabowski. I am a developer advocate at Permit.io. You also might know me from YouTube. I do a little bit of YouTube. I have amassed a little bit of a following. So if you have seen me, you have seen some of my videos there where I teach web development and creative web dev. You might also know me as an open source contributor. I have a very famous project called Musish, which gained renowned reputation by Apple, ended up being invited by Apple to their main headquarters in California. That was fun, very exciting. So if you want to know more about that, message me on my socials. So you can find me at Developer Philip. Now that's all about me. And then let's pass it to our amazing guests. So whichever one of you guys want to start, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay,
Ramona.
so gladly. So I'm happy to see all of you guys here in this webinar, but also when it comes to in front of your screens. Even if I cannot see you, I'm so happy to have you here. My name is Ramona. I'm working as a developer advocate at Auth0 by Okta since some month. So I guess I'm still a little baby advocate. However, I'm still giving my best, and I'm happy to dive into security topics and identity topics right now. Before, I've been a front-end engineer and a quality engineer for around 8 years. And then before that was typical education. And doing both at the same time. And having authorization and authentication as a consumer, because you need to log in and have some access control in e-commerce, right? So I hope with all those experiences, I can bring a nice little point of view and get into front-end authorization right now with you guys.
I think so too. Amazing. Thanks for being here, Ramona. And Dev?
Hello. It's nice to be here. My name is Dev, and I'm a dev. I have been writing full-stack JavaScript applications for about 7 years now. Currently, I work as a software engineer at Smart Data. And obviously, there has been a lot of exploring and building auth from scratch and using auth libraries in my kind of career. But probably the more relevant pieces of background for today are, the first one is that I worked as a developer advocate at Clerk for about a year. Now, I'm not obviously representing Clerk here because I no longer work there, but that time did give me a lot of insight and perspective about just the auth and front-end space in general. And the other kind of relevant piece of background is that I wrote a paper on access control and security for smart homes using IoT devices. Obviously, it doesn't have much to do with front end, but we kind of tried to come up with an access control system, which was also called REBAC, something that Permit has a very different take on. It's just the acronym is the same, but the concept is very different. And yeah, so those are the two relevant pieces of background, and I'm very excited to chat more about front end development, auth, and all the good stuff that developers can play with these days.
Amazing. It's awesome to have you here, Dev. And I kind of want to start this, I'd say a discussion, because I think those are most fun and interesting. And I want to throw a question at you guys to kind of kick us off. And the first question is, what do you guys think of security and front-end applications, well, this year and in general now that we got to the stage where supposedly we think that everyone is somewhat aware that it's important. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, absolutely. And I would divide my answer into two parts. It's better and it's worse. Should we start with the bad or with the worse or the better?
Give us the bad stuff. Give us the bad stuff.
So I guess especially right now, it's more dangerous when it comes to being outside in the web, especially as a web developer. When it comes to more attack, might it be criminal, might be even political. There's lots of things going on and lots of exploits and vulnerabilities, and especially occasions where we could be a little better or where we are just like outnumbered by all the attackers. However, it's better too because we have many resources, we have a wonderful community, we have OWASP, for example, we have lots of ways on how to conquer it. So we have more dangerous parts, but we have more security and more like countermeasures too. So I wouldn't be completely afraid, but we need to highlight the importance and work on it to make the web a better place, at least the web, if not the world.
But do you think that we still need to start highlighting the importance to people and make people aware that this is quite important and it could be a front end holds still a lot of vulnerabilities? Or do you both think that this is something that we're slowly coming across and we're kind of meeting that bridge and crossing it?
Well, I wouldn't stop because humans are humans, and it's the same with tests, it's the same with accessibility, with all those important topics which should be there, but are not that often like a direct requirement, but more like those smart functional requirements. Lots of people try to brush it off and become like, I want to build stuff fast and not take care of those important things. So I will not stop highlighting it, even if I think we're better. I will not stop. At least I know.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, I think in general, anything to do with security, especially when we're talking about front end in itself, is extremely critical. I think no matter how our technology advances, no matter how much AI they're going to shove into any product, there's always going to be emerging vulnerabilities that are going to come into place, and there's going to be always extreme need to continuously educate people that that's the case. Because I think a lot of the time we can very easily become fazed by something that we're building and just completely forget about it, right?
Yeah. The way I would like to put it is that attackers constantly evolve with time, with technology, with hardware, with software. But at the same time, the platforms also evolve with them. So it's always kind of a lockstep between the attackers and the defenders. And we as developers, the best we can do is try our best to just keep up with not only like what kind of vulnerabilities we should know about that we should take care of, but also what kind of vulnerabilities are actually going to have an impact on us, or what kind of issues are worth addressing. Because you sometimes the smallest issues can be like very quickly addressed, but sometimes they can take so much effort that you might spend all your effort just trying to make things secure and bulletproof, but you didn't put enough effort into your business. So there has to
Right.
be a constant balance between there.
Do you think that there should be like mechanisms or like solutions put into place to stay on top of it?
For sure, yeah. There should certainly be some sort of processes or um, at least motivations or incentives for developers to
Right.
constantly think about security, because I know for my time as like 6 or 7 years of development, I haven't really uh, like I don't dedicate a lot of my time thinking about how do I make this secure. I just like follow industry practices. So as an ecosystem, we can just try to make things easier for developers so that
Right.
uh, they can make those trade-offs when they have to.
But
And
really follow. Yeah.
oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Mine automations. There are some automated security testing tools which can remind you of stuff. So you just need to try them out, I think.
Yeah, and I think in general, following industry practices, I think kind of covers you in some kind of fundamental way. And there's always an example I like to go back to. And it's like, I remember when I was still at school during a computer science class, they told me to write this basic app. And I remember doing it in PHP. And I remember writing an authentication like system myself, right? Now, how secure would that be? Well, obviously it was crap. It wasn't secure at all, right? And then, but suddenly we obviously looking at it now, when we think about building an application, we just assume that, oh yeah, we're going to use and outsource this authentication solution, and we're going to go and outsource this database, and we're going to go and outsource another kind of framework that we might want to use. And suddenly, because we're using these things that already exist, we're kind of covering ourselves and kind of implementing the best practices that these people who designed these solutions already embedded into them, right? So that's kind of, I think, following best practices in this case is a good thing because it kind of prevents you from making further mistakes. But again, that kind of that whole aspect of like having that incentive for engineers to continuously want to be educated in that matter is really important. Now, going off of that, obviously, sometimes security fixes, solving for any vulnerabilities in the front end can be quite harsh. So how do we combine that with good user experience?
Yeah, this is always a fun kind of tension to go with, because I think there's kind of a constant battle between how secure can we make it and how user friendly can we make something. So like
Yeah.
if you think about like password rules or MFA steps or like security experts will always want users to jump through more hoops so that they have less work to do. But product people or user experience like anyone who cares about the user will want less hoops. So this is like something that's like a constant tug and war or like tug of war between user experience and security. And I think there are kind of some ways to like approach kind of a sweet spot there. And I
Definitely.
think libraries and auth providers are doing a great job of
Mm.
like brute forcing to find that sweet spot.
A wonderful sweet spot in my opinion is, for example, all those passwordless aspects, because nobody likes to remember passwords, right? And
Yes.
especially passkeys are something which I really love. Because of that, they are pretty secure. Of course, you cannot have 100%, but it's a big step forward. And especially for people who are not that tech savvy, it's not that much noticeable. So I like it. It includes biometrics, it's secure, and people are happy to not keep 1,000 of passwords inside of their head.
Yeah, that is such a really good point. I personally, I'm very prone to forgetting all my passwords, even
Same.
if especially if I recently changed the password and it had to be something different. I just know by fact I'm gonna forget it. So having those like that user experience of being able to log in and it's like, oh, do you want an OTP code or do you want like a magic link to your email? How nice is that? It makes it so much easier. Because my email is really the only thing I will not forget my password to, because it's so important to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of these there are a lot of these nice hacks through like UI libraries and other implementations that increase the user experience. But then again, in that case, if something goes wrong, for example, as part of this user experience, do we blame the front end developer?
What can you elaborate on like what something goes wrong?
Let's assume that as part of the user experience, the front-end developer did something wrong where he introduced a vulnerability as part of an OTP, and suddenly you can somewhat bypass it. Is that a front-end developer mistake, and do we blame them for that?
And generally, I don't like to blame developers because we're all human, right? If we do mistakes at it, it's always a team effort. So maybe there was a little gap in the requirements. Maybe it was built that way. Maybe the technology is just not there yet. It could be so many causes and influences. So blame the team or blame the technology, but not the only person who's building it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the earlier point about providing incentives and putting those processes in place to make sure what we put out there is secure. And if we do ship something that happens to have vulnerabilities, that just means we need to revisit our like process of how these changes get reviewed, or like if someone's adding sensitive secure features like auth, those need to those like we need to pay special attention to them when reviewing or before deploying them, to make sure they follow criteria, or maybe even before that, like when I was talking about, make sure the requirements are there. Like if you're implementing something like multi-factor, you need to make sure you have a very good idea of how to make multi-factor process or flow both secure and a nice user experience, and then have that in mind when you're implementing or when you're testing.
Right. And talking about user experience in the front end, do you think that the developer experience while implementing these third-party frameworks, applications to help you manage the security in your app, would that in conclusion lead to a better user experience? So the developer experience leading to a better user experience?
Yeah, I do think so, at least as a result, like far along the lines. Because if a developer can develop or build his stuff, ship their stuff more quickly, they have more time to even like focus on those aspects, right? So they don't need to take care of like of processes, which might be something we need to do like in all kinds of application, and not the main selling point, not like stuff like accessibility, which might be like postponed if you get into like deadlines. So I do think if a developer has more time to take care of those aspects, he will take it.
Interesting.
Yeah, DX is very crucial because as we are lazy people, we don't want to do things over and over again. We don't want to do complex things. So make things easy for me, please, so that I don't have to struggle.
So in that case, going to maybe in some way a controversial question, maybe not so much anymore. What about buy versus build in software for companies? Do you think companies should buy and outsource things that are already pre-built, or should they build their own?
Yeah. So I think the real answer is it depends.
Yeah, same here.
Both of you. Okay.
Yeah. So it obviously comes down to what it depends on. So the way I like to again basically anything that I say at this point can be considered like a generalization or a simplification of the real trade-offs. But like I guess one of the factors in there is when if you're working on a project, are you trying to optimize for shipping features and like getting product out there in hands of users and making revenue out of it and iterating on features? Is that something that you're optimizing for, or are you optimizing for making sure the costs of your product, like of operating and developing your product, are as low as possible, and you don't have to like pay services or platforms to do the things that you can just do yourself? Like can you spend that time to build things so that you don't have to pay someone else to build them for you or to buy from them? And if you can, like that's kind of where what the decision comes down to. So if you're a startup, if you're trying to like ship something and prove like that your ideas work, or that you can make revenue off of it, then sure, go and buy an auth product so that you can ship that. You don't have to worry about that. But for example, I work on a lot of volunteer projects where we can't really afford to pay for pretty much anything because they're just like volunteer-based organizations and they just want like a website out there or they want a little app. And I don't think I would necessarily want to bring in uh, a lot of these buy services there because we just want this
Yeah.
to run for a couple of years without a lot of maintenance and without hopefully any costs at all, so that can just keep running in the background and help a few people here and there.
Yeah, I think that that's actually interesting that you raised that. I also think that it's also good to consider sometimes, which a lot of people forget about, is that if you're running a large enterprise, for example, and you have a feature that you want to develop, and let's say you have a team of like 20 people developing this, and you estimate the time frame to be about 3 years. Probably at that point, because of how expensive engineers are, it's probably better to outsource and buy. And then in that kind of scenario, it has a lot of benefits, right? In some of the scenarios you describe, like for example, charity work and building something for a nonprofit, then well, of course, you don't want to push them into something where suddenly they might become a successful nonprofit and suddenly they have to pay big bucks for
Exactly.
something, right? So that's interesting. That's interesting. Ramona, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I would kind of agree. Sometimes it makes sense even for small groups or associations to check out if the free tier is already working out. Because I guess with some tools it does, but I don't know all pricing of all tools right now. But sometimes you are really like lucky when it comes to that, or they have nonprofit options. From the other side, when it comes to having an enterprise and you have lots of really custom requirements which might not fit a standardized tool, then it might make sense to build it on your own too. However, from my point of view, being a front-end engineer, I wouldn't know if I can always maintain a complete authentication authorization process with all those security aspects and all those dependencies.
Yeah.
So this gives me lots of, okay, I have huge respect when it comes to those topics, and then I might like to basically buy it or like go for a free tier if I need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
One small thing I would add to that is this build versus buy kind of statement often like misses the nuance that building is not like you build it, you're done with it. It's that you build it and you keep building it and you keep evolving it and you keep
Exactly.
as requirements change. So it's not
Yeah.
like I always see this as like it's just such a one-off thing. You spend like a weekend writing it and you're done forever. Like, no, that's not how it is. That's never how it is.
Yeah, and now kind of narrowing down on access control, and again, kind of going back a little bit to user experiences. How can we ensure that the user has good experience while working with access control, while developing access control? Is there any kind of top tips that you guys might have? Knowing both of you, well, Ramona, you're still work at Auth0. Dev, you've worked at Clergo.dev, so both authentication companies with a bunch of authorization expansions as well inside of them. Is there a good kind of user experience when working with access control?
Yeah, use what you're building. This fastest way to like find out the UX bugs. It's like become a user of your product.
That's yeah, for sure. I mean, we at Permit had that situation as well. I mean, I usually am the first person to kind of test any new features, and I'm usually the person that also finds a lot of bugs or a lot of little quirky things, that might not impact the user, but they're there. And
Yeah.
and I'm a little OCD about these things. So I even if there is a little space after a dot, I'll find it.
Yeah,
Anything
and
else?
my time working at Clerk was like this taken to the extreme because every time I talked to an engineer at Clerk, they were like every time they were like I asked them, hey, what are you working on? Hey, what is something you're thinking about, or anything like that. Like every time they talk about it, it always comes down to, okay, this is how we're going to improve the developer experience or the user experience. So
Mhm.
like every engineer had this like at the top of their minds, like whatever they're building, it is first primarily to enhance the UX and the DX. And then
Mhm.
they think about like, okay, how do we make this secure? How do we make sure all the edge cases are covered? So
Okay.
yeah, just like having that at the front of your mind, like how are you improving the experience first is
Mhm.
a great thing. And obviously, like using those products yourself is a great way to get into that mindset in the first place.
So
As
so
a,
they yeah,
sorry,
Ramona, go for it,
as
go
a
for it.
former quality engineer, I love that. And another thing which I would like to add is keep stuff as simple as possible. And this is also true for user experience and user interfaces. Because I do think authorization helps there, because if you basically remove stuff which a user doesn't need because he's not able to access, use it, whatever, it will help to keep the experience more lean, more clean, and more not cluttered, which will help a lot when it comes to like the users using your application. When it comes to the person trying to set the rights, like administering it, it might be a good idea to give him as much possibilities, as much freedom as possible. Some fine grained authorization, for example, could help there a lot. So he doesn't need to like change his own ways of working and workflows just to fit the solution. It should be otherwise.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which, by the way, is very difficult to achieve, but if you
It
can,
is.
it's nirvana.
It is.
And when we talk about access control and the workflow, well, how would you guys describe like a good workflow when we go from authentication to the authorization side? Is there anything that you guys currently don't like with the way how these two sync together? Is there anything that you guys like a lot of how these kind of almost seamlessly in some scenarios integrate together? What do you think of the general workflow?
Go ahead, Ramona.
Let's start with that. I don't like that people always tell like authentication versus authorization, because it's not one side or the other or one against each other. I don't know. For me, authentication is the first step for everything, because you need to know who your users are before you can decide what they are able to do. So authentication is the basis, and then the authorization should happen seamlessly for the user using the application, so that as soon as it's clear what user it is, maybe a customer, maybe a merchant, a vendor, that some roles, for example, are assigned to them. Roles because for the admin, for example, it's easier to distinguish those people. And then having those roles connected to like their access, the rights, the permissions they have. May it be corrupt permissions, may it be, okay, this is a merchant, he needs to have different prices, needs to have different landing pages, I don't know. I'm using e-commerce right now as an example because I was used to it beforehand, before joining Auth0. The user or the customer as it shouldn't notice anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you just described is what we call the identity and access management waterfall, where we're
Yes.
kind of going through the basic stages of authenticating and authorizing a user, which a lot of people get confused because they think it's the same thing, but it's not. And as part of that, yes, you have the user logging in, you have them confirming who there actually is, who they claim to be, their actual identity, and then at that point, what I like to call it is the handoff point. Is the handoff point between your authentication solution and it confirming who you really are, to then transferring you to the authorization solution and assigning you the relevant permissions, or in other words, the relevant roles, before actually rendering any of the front-end application to you. So once you actually start using the application, all those claims and all those kind of fundamentals for that specific session for that user have been made clear, right? And then after that, it's actually, and this is the next topic I kind of want to go into. It's really interesting how then we can start to manipulate the front end based on authorization, based on things like feature flagging, right? And what do you guys think of feature flagging?
They're awesome. More people should use feature flags.
Why?
Um, I I think the first so from a developer perspective, I think feature flags is very important in terms of not like it's kind of like the opposition of making feature branches in Git. where like we don't need to, like if 5 developers are working on 5 different features, we don't need like 5 of them to have completely independent branches and then like have huge merge commits when they all come together. So feature flags is just a nice way for us to continue working on new features or changing things on the application, but put them behind a feature flag so they don't actually show up in production or they don't change what the user experience is like until we are ready, at which point we just switch the feature flag, or we can like test it with like a small subset of users or on a separate environment, or like users can opt into it. So it basically just allows a lot more freedom into uh, how new things like get rolled out into production instead of just like, okay, here's a branch. At some point, we're going to merge it into the main branch, which is going to cause a huge merge conflict, which we'll then spend 30 minutes resolving. And then once we hit push, we'll just sit there and pray that everything gets deployed and everything still works.
Yeah, where you could just
yeah.
switch a toggle and it suddenly will either be there or not, right?
Yeah. So for me, that's like the biggest advantage of feature flags. And obviously that plays very nicely into authorization and permissions, because there's a lot of ways that you can roll out feature flags, and authorization is a great way to combine that, because you have the user specific and session specific information that you can use to cater like, okay, which feature flag should we show you, which feature flag should we not show you. And it's also a great way to just like gate features behind certain permissions. So you can kind of decouple the idea of a permission and a feature, and like manage that independently. So like, so at any point you can change, like the business requirements can change and say that, okay, these features are now available to this other group of users as well. And all you have to do is to like change the mapping between feature flags and permissions and nothing else, and everything works exactly as you expect them to.
Yeah, exactly. I think the beauty here in general is that we can start to decouple permissions in itself from our applications, and that makes it much more manageable, whatever we're working with, whether it's feature flagging or just simple authorization, but just decoupling those complex rules, and in this case complex languages, because at the end of the day, the proper way of implementing authorization for those listening here is by working with a policy engine, by learning, or having an engineer who's working in your team given the task of learning a new language that the policy engine understands, something like Rego code or Cedar, which are quite hard in themselves and very recursive languages. So it's a bit of a difficulty to learn. So in general, taking that and kind of being able to decouple all of those languages and have them kind of, at the end of the day, almost abstracted, and being able to kind of work with feature flagging and therefore work with the really complex authorization code and put it into the front end by simple feature flagging and offer a nice user experience to the end user, I think it's a big win. And I'm surprised not that many people, unless I'm wrong, and maybe you guys know, but you don't often hear of many companies being like big advocates of feature flagging. Yes, they use them, but not a lot of companies say, "Oh my God, this is like amazing," or have you heard otherwise?
Well,
You must
maybe it's
not.
taken for
You must not
granted.
be.
Oh,
You must
sorry.
not be seeing Launch Darkly all over your Twitter feed. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Ramona, you were saying something?
And maybe it's like some workflow which is almost taken for granted. So people think like everyone's using it, so why should we talk about it? Just learn.
Yeah, exactly. And I can see we have some questions coming into the Q&A.
Nice.
Let's have a read at this one. Hello, everyone. Is this going to be a podcast kind of thing, or are we going to actually go through real case scenarios showing real code examples? Interesting. I don't have any real code examples. I could pull something up, but if you have any questions and you want to let us know exactly what type of code example you want to see, do let us know, and I can definitely pull something up. I'm sure I'll be able to find something specifically for feature flagging. Now, when it comes to permissions in front-end applications, do you guys think there is any kind of challenges in enforcing permissions in modern applications?
Oh yeah.
Yes? Tell us.
You wanna start with this one, Ramona?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I think the biggest challenge with permissions and authorization for developers is that authorization is very much like a modeling problem. That's how I like to like distinguish between authentication and authorization by saying authorization is a modeling problem. You have to understand
Mm,
your domain, your product, your users, your business, your org structure, and authentication is more of a distributed systems problem. You have to understand like protocols and specs and trust, security, all of these things. So when it comes to authorization, uh, a lot of times, like us as developers, we just have the mindset of, okay, jump in and start coding and push something up, and we'll see what happens. Um, Authorization is one of those things where you have to make it like a good user experience, to make sure your users understand, well, what kind of authorization policies are out there, because authorization is directly user facing. You need to have a shared language. So if you might have heard about like domain driven design. It talks
mm.
about something called ubiquitous language, which is like a shared language for the things within our application, uh, between the developers, the users, the business, and all of those things. So that's kind of where authorization falls in as well. Um, a lot of times, like it's easy to jump in and just CRUD permissions everything. Like we have a database table and there's 4 permissions there: create, read, update, delete, and that's all there is. But that's not often how users think about permissions. So aligning developers and users on like what permissions need to exist in the first place and then what roles need to exist on top of it is probably one of the most challenging things. Because once you have those concepts, it's very easy to go ahead and implement them. We have like a variety of tools out there, everything from open source libraries to fully featured services like Permit. But it's just like finding that alignment and that shared language.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I kind of touched on earlier. It's like
Mhm.
with authorization, you have policy languages that you can now pick from and policy engines that you can use. And at the end of the day, it's
Mhm.
like, which one do you use? Which one is the most robust? Which one is the best one? Of course, you have policy engines like OPA, who is technically what CNCF approved,
Mhm.
and predominantly the most popular one out there. But is it the
Or
best
like
one?
Google Zanzibar, which is like the
Exactly. So that
monster.
that's another one, especially for modeling relationship-based permissions, which
Mhm.
then to me that gets mind-blowing because in general, and I think we have a question, someone asking us to describe different types of authorization models. So I can kind of
Ooh.
jump into that in a second and talk about the 3 main ones. But yeah, Google Zanzibar gets really kind of really crazy, especially with like to myself, permissions are. Uh, once you work with them, you can understand them. But at the moment when you get to permissions and you need to start working with recursive permissions where you can do like reverse indices on them, where rather than, for example, saying user A has access to this resource, therefore he has this role, rather than then you can actually say as a reverse indice, well, I have this user identity, what type of roles does he have, right, for example. And that's where permissions get quite interesting, because that's actually solving the problem, which is very relevant to a lot of companies, of having or being able to tell those facts.
Mind error handling from the start, so you don't need to debug all those things.
Sorry, say it again. I didn't catch that. It broke up
Oh,
for me.
sorry. Mind error handling from the start, without telling too much about the system, of course, because
Yes.
otherwise you will invite attackers in. However, try to help your developer if they need to debug it, because I sometimes stumbled upon debugging conflicting other like permissions, and yeah, that was painful.
Yeah,
Exactly.
errors with permissions are a fun thing because like if someone doesn't have access to a resource, do you tell them that, oh, this resource doesn't exist, or that this resource does exist, but you don't have permission to it?
Exactly
So
that.
So
yeah,
which one do you tell them?
depends on the business case. Sometimes you might want to say that, oh no, this does exist, but
Yeah.
you don't have resource, you don't have permission here. Here's a way to request permission from the owner or whoever can provide you permission. Or sometimes you're like, no, doesn't exist. What are you talking about?
And it
Yeah.
depends on if you want the user to know that there's still something which he is not able to access. Maybe because it's just like grayed out or read only, or if it's completely gone.
Exactly. I think also to add to kind of the challenges with enforcing permissions, I think a lot of people think in general that, permissions, or at least that's the kind of approach that people have when they first hear of permissions. They're like, well, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to set up an admin role. He's going to have elevated permissions to all the other roles, and it's just all going to work out of the box, right? And then suddenly, like, company requirements grow, you get more like you get more things that you need to manage, and suddenly he's like, oh, you know what, really, I should probably add a few more roles. So he has like a super admin role and a viewer role, and now the super admin can do more than admin, and the viewer can only view some limited permissions, and he thinks that's all well and good. And then suddenly the company scales, you get more departments, you get more people asking you for things that need to be done and things that need to be protected. And suddenly your requirements grow even more. And then you get the engineers who suddenly get assigned the ticket to develop these permissions. One day they come in with a full head of hair. The next day they have no hair because they pulled all of their hair out of all the stress of how much work this is going to cost. And then finally, when they actually do all of this, of course, they create a PR and it just fails. And they get shouted at because the policy engine doesn't understand the Rego code that they wrote that they just had to learn. So in general, the whole process of developing permissions, I think, is a challenge because you're never aware and you can never predict how quickly your requirements grow. And very often companies fail to see that, and they make the mistake thinking that they don't need much permissions, and suddenly they grow a little bit, and it suddenly changes the whole permission model. And therefore, going back to your point, the modeling of these permission models becomes extremely difficult because you really need to have a good understanding of the whole system.
Yeah, and God help you if you're building something B2B.
Exactly. Yes.
Dark memories.
Yes, exactly. Now, guys, going back to this question, do you guys feel ready to undertake to try and explain the basic three main permission models? How confident do you feel? I'm putting you on the spot here. I'll be
Sure,
able to
there's
help.
three of us, one each.
Sure.
I'm
So
not so sure if I can explain them completely fine, so I would like to pass it on to you.
so the first one is RBAC, so role-based access control. Do you guys know that one?
Mhm.
Go for it. Quick
Sure.
explanation.
Yeah, so role-based permissions is simply where every user in your application just gets a role, and all you do is check for that role before any operation is allowed. So like an admin or a viewer or member permission, or for something like a moderator, or it's basically when you divide users into certain groups, and those groups have like different sets of permissions. Now on top of that, you can build like a separate permission system where your entire application has a bunch of permissions, and roles are just like collections of those permissions. And maybe there's some recursive where like one role includes everything
Yes.
from a different role, and then its own permissions on top. So you can do all sorts of things, but the base primitive there is the role,
Is
and
the
every
role.
user has at least one role.
Exactly. And kind of the basic idea of a role is that a role can interact with a specific resource and perform some kind of action on it. So that's why you have the very basic example that an administrator can read a document, right? And that's like the classic example of a role-based access control policy. What about the more complicated one, ABAC, attribute-based access control? Do you feel comfortable, or do you want me to do it?
I mean, I can talk about it. Ramona, do you want to take that
Please
one?
go ahead if
Okay.
you want to. I'm new, so I guess you would be better
Got
at
it. Okay.
explaining than I am.
Cool. Attributes-based access control is a lot more fine-grained than role-based. Um, in attributes-based, like every user and every resource could have some attributes. So, for example, if I log into an application, you can have what time did I sign in, or what time is it here right now? What location did I sign in from? Or what organization am I part of? Like literally anything can be an attribute about the user, about the session, and then the thing that I'm trying to talk to, the resource that I'm trying to read or trying to perform an action on, that resource can have a bunch of different attributes. And it's just kind of like a huge matrix of what attributes do you check for the user and for the resource. So like the simplest form of this is like a to-do list where I create certain to-dos, and all those to-dos have like an owner ID or the creator, the author ID, and you're going to check for that before you allow someone to delete or edit a specific to-do. But let's say anyone else can see my to-dos. So that's like a very basic version of attribute-based access control, where the attribute is the owner of like whoever created that to-do. And this can obviously take much more complicated complicated forms as you grow out. So something like a forum system or a Reddit will have much more complicated attribute-based system.
Yeah, that is actually spot on. And funny that you mentioned the to-do example, because as part of our demo that we do at Permit, we showcase a to-do app. And as part of that to-do app, we're logged in as an administrator, and we can create the tasks, and we can edit the tasks, and we can delete the tasks. But as part of ABAC and showcasing ABAC, we actually don't have the ability to delete a task. We can only delete it once we check it. So we're meeting like this condition, this attribute of checked. If it's equal to true, then we can delete it. And of course, that would be on the resource. Expanding kind of further on the classic example of admin can read a document. If we wanted to expand that to like an ABAC, we would say, well, an administrator who's located in the continental US and works between 9 and 5 can only read a document, I don't know, on Sundays or something. I don't know, something like that, right? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, or maybe like I need to be in a specific location, like I need to be signed into a VPN, or I need to be in my office to be able to access a certain resource. I cannot be like just at my home or like somewhere random from my phone access something.
Exactly. And the cool thing about attribute-based access control is when you're setting up these conditions, essentially you're able to work with something that you've learned in computer science, which is logic gates. So you have a bunch of AND clauses or OR clauses, and you can build this really complex kind of set of conditions that you want to match upon like the evaluation of the policy to say, well, yeah, you're allowed to do this, or you're not allowed because you match all the parameters, but you're not based in Poland, so we're not going to accept you and approve your request. And now the more complicated policy model, REBAC, which stands for Relationship-Based Access Control. Dev, you've been doing well. Do you wanna give?
I'll let you take that one. I don't understand a lot. I don't understand enough about REBAC yet. So, obviously, the one that I invented, yeah, I know about that, but that's ancient history.
The REBAC, yeah?
Yeah.
So REBAC stands for Relationship-Based Access Control, and it's essentially one of the more complex policy models, which is based, well, like the name states itself, on relationships. Now, the way I kind of like to think about REBAC is to think about a graph. And this is where things get very interesting, because as part of the graph, every graph has nodes and edges on it. Each node technically becomes the resource that you're interacting with, and each edge defines the relationship that resource has, or those resources have, between one another. So the classic example here, that if an administrator has access to a folder and there's files inside of this folder, well, I automatically derive the access to all those files inside that folder if I'm the owner of that folder, for example. And that's how you see those permissions in some way cascade. And the cool thing is that with relationship-based access control, those permission levels can cascade for many, well, they can go down many levels. So for example, if you have an operation, and each operation has multiple farms, and each farm has multiple fields. If you have the permissions to run an operation, you automatically have the permissions to run a farm, and therefore run the multiple fields. That's how the cascading effect essentially goes. So that's kind of a REBAC in short, basically. Awesome. So now kind of moving on, we don't have much time left, so I want to leave some time for questions. So if you guys have any questions, please post them down in the Zoom chat, or please leave your questions on the YouTube live stream if you're watching from YouTube, and we'll get to those in just a second. I do want to end with one final question before we jump onto the questions to our awesome guests. And I have that security and access control. Does that make, when we talk about security and access control, does that, or do we have any preferences in deciding what kind of front-end framework we might be using to kind of work with these specific solutions?
I would say it depends if you want to use a tool which is already given and released, or if you want to build it on your own. If you want to have a certain tool, I would check if it's supported by the frameworks in a good way, maybe SDKs, maybe documentation, maybe a community Discord, whatever, what can help you in implementing it. In any case, I would take a look on how well they behave when it comes to security issues. So do they have a certain person working on those? Is there a high priority, which you can see? And are there like hot fixes in a quick manner so you can see that the framework is doing a good job on handling those?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you want to build it completely on your own, I would go with the framework which matches your expertise the best.
And what about like working with, do you think, for example, full stack frameworks and full stack applications allow you to much easier or allow you to work with authorization in a much more secure way?
Yeah. I think full stack was something that we have seen recently, especially thanks to like some of these full stack frameworks like Next.js, is that auth libraries or auth services, especially like libraries that you just bring in and plug and play into your projects. A lot of them used to be just like backend specific, like here's a few database functions or middleware functions or API endpoints that you can call.
Mm-hmm.
And then like you do everything else yourself. But now because full stack is like bringing this front end and back end together in a much nicer way, in a much more composable way. A lot of these auth providers, auth libraries are able to do a lot more work for us, uh, which means they're not only providing like these backend functions or database schemas or API endpoints, they're also providing UIs to go with them that automatically talk to those endpoints, which means a lot of that full stack security is built into them. A lot of session management is built into them. A lot of UX flows for like multi-factor auth or email verification or password change. These are like built into these libraries as like UI flows that we don't have to implement ourselves. And obviously, like this is a big DX boost, but it's also a nice security boost because that means I, as a developer, don't have to think about how to do security on the web, how to do session management, how to do these like handshakes and all of these like different
Right.
things between my front end and the back end, which used to be a big challenge because these two pieces were so disconnected from each other.
Exactly. Exactly. And now with front end and full stack applications, you basically get, I'd like to say almost an out of the box communication where they interact together, and it's just much easier to develop.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So I think we've got 5 minutes left until we wrap up this live stream. So I think it's good to take some questions. So if you have anyone listening here has any pending questions, make sure you ask them right now. First of all, we have 2 anonymous questions actually. Someone said, "I'm a second-year student and I want to ask a question: how to understand the syntax in a correct manner to master the MERN stack?"
Syntax of what exactly? Like JavaScript?
Well, I assume a MERN stack is a full JavaScript framework, right? Used for building web applications.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that MERN stack is kind of a thing of a past. It's we very quickly realized that it's not actually a good idea to have like very disconnected things and gluing everything together. Just pick up like an actual full stack framework like I don't know, Next.js, Redwood, there's a bunch of them out there. MERN is like if you just go for like bare bone MERNs, that's not a good starting point at all.
Awesome. All right. The next question we have is, if we are developing a full stack application, should we validate the fields like passwords on both client as well as server? That's a good one. Anyone of you guys?
Want to take that? Okay. Sure. I mean, you should definitely do them on the server, obviously, but validating them on the client is just like a really nice UX boost. Like you can give instant feedback,
Absolutely,
but
I
obviously
agree.
don't trust on that.
I agree, but also with that, you have to be careful how you validate on the front end. Of course, the back end is necessary; it has to be done. I wouldn't go without it. On the front end, it sometimes, if you give too much detail or you try and be too nice with your UX, like saying, "Oh, your password is too long," or like, "Oh, your password you have incorrect characters in there," and things like that. Some of the prompt messages can kind of actually lead people to, in a much easier way, kind of debug what your password might be and maybe even hack you. You have to kind of be careful with the UX aspect of showcasing password errors.
I think the bigger factor with passwords is that just have nicer password rules. Like you don't need to make users jump through like, okay, I have uppercase, lowercase, make sure numbers,
Yes.
symbols, all of those. Like it's kind of like a bureaucratic thing at this point. Longer passwords are almost always more secure than like
Yes.
more digit passwords. So just like make them 8, 9 characters and you're fine.
Yeah, I agree.
Passphrases, use those.
I agree. Any suggestion on dealing with feature flags in on-prem deployments? I'm
No.
not super comfortable on-prem deployments because it's literally taking everything bare metal and putting it putting it on a site with a air-gapped network. I mean,
I think
I think
all I would say is that it's not that different from cloud. Like feature
really,
flags,
yeah,
they're
it's
not going to change much.
exactly. I mean, you can. I assume as long as you can kind of download the package offline and use it, you can just use it in the same way. So technically, you can achieve the same kind of experience of feature flagging on-prem or if it's on-prem or not, actually.
Yeah. Go ask
Uh,
DHH. He has a bunch of on-prem stuff.
exactly. Yeah. All right. Next questions. Right. Let's have a look. Not sure you already covered that, but I wonder how you deal with the case protecting UI. Do you evaluate permissions before rendering and show only relevant elements, for example, buttons or tabs? Or do you render everything and evaluate permissions on the user actions? So in regards to evaluating permissions, first of all, the basic principle is that any kind of permission checks you will do are always on the backend. The backend will always come first. So in regards to rendering specific components in the UI, well, first of all, you create that guard in the backend. And then based on the result of that guard, you kind of conditionally render the components in the front end. I think that's kind of the usual approach that I would suggest is best practice. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely agree. Because otherwise, at least when it comes to performance, it would be bad to do it otherwise.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that will be all the questions for today. So if you guys have any other, oh, we just had one pop in. Matt, props to Philip, first time listening, and I'm definitely checking out his other work. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I
Agreed.
appreciate it. That's very kind of you.
Agreed.
Very kind of you.
You're a great
All
host.
right. So we're 1 minute left. So we're gonna let everyone go a minute early. I'm hoping that they wouldn't want to go. Anyhow, guys, it was such a pleasure having you guys. Thank you for making an hour of your day to come and chat to me and talk about front-end authorization and just chat tech in general, because that's what we like doing. Also to all the audience, thank you so much for being here and thank you to listening to us. Hopefully you've learned something new. As always, feel free to message me if you find me on social media at Developer Philip. Do you guys have any handles that you want to spread and talk about yourself where they can find you if they wanna message you?
Yeah, find me on Twitter. It's my full name. You'll find it somewhere with a 09 at the end. And I make YouTube videos sometimes. So if you liked whatever I had to say here, you're going to love my YouTube videos as well. It's Dev Agr 09 on YouTube, or you can just search my full name.
Love
Yeah,
it.
in my
So
case,
everyone.
it's similar. So LinkedIn, Twitter, or Mastodon. It's better to search for my full name because my handle is a little German, so it's difficult to spell it in English, leichtdeckig. So just go with my full name. You will find me, and I'd be happy to talk with you there about like all the things tech related, actually.
Amazing. Awesome. And just to wrap up, I think One thing I need to say is that this live stream was sponsored by Permit.io. So if you guys haven't checked out Permit.io before, make sure you do. Permit.io is a full stack authorization as a service. It's a no-code platform that allows you to build all your permissions without writing any code. So there is some magic in that, and it makes it very, very simple. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out at Permit.io. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our audience, and we'll see you next month in another live stream.